Hi Laura, happy Thanksgiving week. I'm going to do my response from the middle of nowhere, Texas this week. You can see the background a little bit. It is awesome out here and quiet and wonderful, but of course I haven't done my video observation or my video response yet, so I'm doing it out here. Thankfully I do have internet access. Even though we're really in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, I'm taking up a ton of time, and so wanted to just discuss this week's theme. I chose characteristics of ASD, and I mentioned in our conference the other day that I'm specifically interested in a couple of kids we have on my campus that have medical diagnoses of autism spectrum disorders, and then those diagnoses were dropped by the school district at a really young age. So this is serving kind of a double dip for me as I'm working with the gen ed teachers to see what kind of supports these kids need, for one. For another, most of my experience is working with kids with more what used to be called classic autism or lower functioning autism. And so I'm really, I'm learning a lot working or observing this kid. I'm not working with him at this point. And just kind of seeing some of those characteristics that I don't quite understand why they weren't seen in a formal assessment. So the first, I'm just going to kind of go through these guiding questions a little bit. He is a kindergarten student. For the sake of this, I've called him Benjamin. He is 5 years old. Just right on track age-wise for kindergarten, and seemingly pretty on track academically from what I could tell during these 2 hours of observation. During the time that I was in there, I'm using my own conference time to go in there, so it's they're doing the same thing every day. They are working on what are called Daily 5 centers, which is literacy centers, and he was participating with the class. Now, this is a very small class. Just happens that our campus is a bit under enrollment this year, which has been super nice instructionally. It's not great for the school budget or anything, but sorry, pardon, here's a dog visitor. But he seems to do okay with that. The things where you really saw those, the first things I really saw those characteristics of ASD were, of course, during transition. All of the students in the class, other than Benjamin, were able to just rotate to the next center at the teacher's cue. The teacher used an auditory cue of a quiet bell ringing, and then also said, "Okay, group 1, go to table 2. Table 2, go to table 3." So there were kind of explicit instructions, and he needed physical prompting with that. He would come back up to the board that showed where all the groups were. He would approach the teacher, or he would just stand there waiting for someone to tell him exactly what to do. And that happened both days that I observed with every transition. So when he was in the center, he was participating independently. The first center he was in was identifying initial sounds. There were some picture cards, and you just wrote the letter of that initial sound of that picture. So, it was boat, you were writing a B. These were pretty self-correcting. They seemed to only be working on a couple of letters at the targeted time. The other kids were doing that as well. And as far as participating in that, the instructions were really clear, and he was able to do that. The other day when he was, or another instance, he was in the reading center, and the reading center has some kind of more open-ended activities. He was to go get his journal. Well, first he didn't know where his journal was. It wasn't where all the other kids' journal was, and then he went to his desk and his journal wasn't there, and then he got a different journal that didn't have his name on it. Then he discarded that journal by just dropping it on the floor, and then went back and eventually found his journal. And during that time, the teacher's kind of observing and checking back in with him, but he had a lot of difficulty starting that task. From what I could observe, there was very little in the way of discrete instructions on what to do, when to know what to start, how to choose a book, and that kind of thing. He did definitely showed a lot greater difficulty with task completion in there. And when he got distracted, he would kind of either stare off into space or, just tap his pencil. He tapped his pencil quite a bit. And then later in that time, I observed him at a bulletin board that had kind of a lot of pictures on it, standing and flapping his hands, which was a more traditional repetitive behavior, self-stimulatory behavior. So overall, I think if a gen ed professional were to walk in that room, it might take a while to notice his differences, especially because he was not disruptive. And I think that a lot of times in public schools or in a lot of settings, any setting working with kids that are not disruptive tend to be overlooked. And so even his difficulty with transitions were not disruptive. The other kids were able to move on. He did take away from the teacher's time, and as far as that goes with helping with other students, but he was not, shouting out. He was not laying on the floor. He was just needed that constant redirection of what to do next. So it's been really interesting. I am hoping to continue at least some more hours with this student. I would like to do the theme of additional supports. I think that he could really, I'm certain he could really benefit from some additional supports that would be easy to implement in a gen ed classroom. And I've kind of started making contact with his family to work on that, and with the gen ed teachers, so that we can start building in some of those independent skills now instead of when he's in 3rd or 4th grade. So it's been a super interesting experience, and I was glad to get a chance to be out in gen ed and see some of those kids. And I have some other observations lined up for some other high functioning friends of ours that I'd like to see kind of how they're doing in a gen ed setting as well. All right, have a very happy Thanksgiving. Again, sorry I rambled on a little long, but hope you enjoy it more than reading a paper, and I will see you again next week. Thanks.